Welcome to the August 2009 meeting of the Murfreesboro Stormwater Advisory Committee. And as always, in the interest of time and the appreciation for these people devoting time to this project when they could be doing other things that are their primary responsibility, we'll try to get through this. As Robert, I believe we have maybe, including approval of the minutes from last time, two things that we need to vote on, so we'll try to get those up front.
Just one.
Just one?
One at the beginning, item number 2.
All right, after the approval of the minutes.
Yes,
okay.
Including, okay.
We'll try to get those early, and then if something comes up that takes more time than we anticipate, for those folks that have prior commitments somewhere else, they can go ahead and leave, and they can watch the reruns to see what they missed. The minutes from the meetings of April 15th, I think were in your package, and if you've had time to take a look at that, I would entertain a motion to approve those, or if there are corrections or additions, let's get those.
I move that we approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
A second.
All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
All right, that was the April 15th meeting, and then we have December 9th. Do I hear a
Move to approve.
second?
A second.
Those in favor? Aye?
Aye.
And this is a good commentary. We're not having to meet that often. That's what I like, this improvement in efficiency. Mr. Haley, I believe the next item is the cooperative agreement between Rutherford County and other folks on the WET project. First of all, you know, my pet project is explain to us what that acronym WET means.
Water Education for Teachers.
I'm impressed.
And the Stormwater Program staff in Laverne and Smyrna, Rutherford County, and Murfreesboro have worked with several county educators, work in the school system, and with the Discovery Center to develop a program where we'll have a Project WET advocate in the schools, supporting the teachers and advocating for Project WET. The program is about, as it says, water education for teachers, protection of water resources. There are stormwater quality components of that training. Probably 50, 60 teachers in the county have been exposed to Project WET and I think are certified. Bonnie Irvin with the Discovery Center is a Project WET trainer, so she's done probably most of those certifications. The stormwater program coordinators in these jurisdictions, we wanted to support that program really more and just have some goals and be able to measure the education that's happening with water resources, water quality protection. So we worked to develop a contract with the Discovery Center, an agreement among the county and cities and town, and so that's what you have before you. And I've kind of big picture there. Maybe if you have any questions, and then I'll hit the next point.
Well, just one point I'd like to make here that impresses me is support is sometimes an ambiguous term. You can support something verbally, you know, I'm for you. But when you support it with funds, that to me is true support, and that's the case of all these, the Rutherford County, City of Murfreesboro, Smyrna, and Laverne. All of these municipalities are supporting this with funds. So they're, in effect, putting their money where their mouth is, which is ultimate commitment.
The The county would enter into a contract with Discovery Center, who would provide the educator, who would work with the schools, and they really administer that contract and some of the record keeping that goes with it. And then Smyrna, Laverne, and Murfreesboro would, we'd have an agreement with the county, and we would pay a portion of the cost to the county. So our Murfreesboro's amount would be about 37% of the total, or about $11,000 a year. And this is just for 1 year right now. Maybe if this works well, we will continue this. And
I believe all these expenses are with prior approval. They have to be approved up front, so there is some control. The county, I believe, will be doing that, so there is some control to make sure that it stays on track and the money is dedicated to what it was intended for.
yes. Yes, sir. So we have some goals for the program. Our ambitious goal is that each student in Rutherford County will be involved in at least 4 hours per year of Project Wet education in 2 school years. We may not achieve that. We're pretty sure we won't the first year, but we've got something to shoot for. So we'd like the students to be able to actually get out in the field, as we say, in a creek, and see the critters in the creek and make the connection between pollution prevention and water quality in the streams. So really, I think if the funding, of course, will have to be approved by City Council, as I understand. So if you like the idea and approve it, then that's sort of what I was looking for today. And if I can talk more about this. Todd Sullivan's also here with the county.
Anyone have any questions of Robert relative to this before we?
Have these monies that we're asking Smyrna, Laverne, Rutherford County, have we approached them about these being in their budgets that's already been approved that go into effect 09, 010, or 09 and 10?
I think in short, yes. I know, of course, we've been meeting all the governments. I think it's approved in Smyrna, I think Rutherford County, and we're working on that here today. And then I think maybe Laverne I think they've approved it at the program level, and maybe waiting for if they have council or their final approval. So Todd Sullivan. So we're all moving forward, I guess, with obtaining those approvals. I think the county maybe was going to wait. I can't speak for Todd, but I know since they're the ones that will be executing the contract, they're kind of waiting for all the other jurisdictions to have kind of final approvals.
Thank you.
Okay.
It seems to me that this is an extremely efficient way to do something, to take Discovery Center, as gifted as they are, and they have a wetlands area on their property, but to be able to network with these guys, it probably makes this a bargain to be able, and for the cooperation the county gives. It looks like to me it's a very a good move on our behalf.
Thank you.
And with that in mind, I would make a motion that we approve this if we're through discussing it.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Do you have your approval, Mr.
Great.
Mayor?
Thank you. I think he'll be really effective.
Is this a pilot program, or has this been done other places, or?
This exactly we don't think has been done other places, and we say
The
that.
cooperative part of it. Is that's what you're speaking of? There's been
Right.
The wet program
yes.
has been done before.
Yes.
But I'm not
Really-
sure if that's what you were asking, whether the wet program or whether this cooperative effort, Al.
I was more of the cooperative effort?
Really hiring an advocate like this who can go into the schools and spend really considerable time and assist the teachers, and we don't think has been done before. We had some communication with the Project Wet National Headquarters, Lorena Lyle, and she didn't think this had been done. She thought it was a great idea. I mean, obviously it's promoting the wet teaching. So we may be a first.
All right, the next item on the agenda, Robert, is that the update on?
Yes, sir. A couple or three stormwater program updates. And so this is real interesting to us, and we hope it will be to you. So we have some slideshows. And Josh Upham will start with this, and he can tell you what he's going to be talking about: storm sewer cleaning and illicit discharge detection. And I'll just let Josh get going. If
Hello, SWAC members. As Robert said, my name is Josh Upham. I work in the Water and Sewer Department. I wanted to just give a little update on the vac truck. As you may or may not know, we purchased a vac truck last year around this time. We've been working in the Sinking Creek basin. So what we did is we used our mapping system and basically found all drains that lead into Sinking Creek and drew a basin around it and been cleaning those drains. And we're finishing up with that. They actually finished last week, so we'll be moving on to a different basin. But before we did that, we wanted to give a quick update. And theoretically, we'd get back to this basin again in several years. But anyway, our vac truck crew, the foreman is Bill Kemp, and then the operators are Kevin Young and Jeff Todd. And as I said, we've been in the Sinking Creek watershed now for close to a year, I would say. And then, just to review, we purchased this vac truck to clear any storm drain or storm lines of sediment. And what that can do is that can clog fish gills, smother bottom communities, and then high turbidity in waters hinders aquatic life. So this is a really important thing. And the vac truck crew had been working in the Sinking Creek basin, but they took a detour, I guess, and started working in the tornado damage path area. And unfortunately, you see there where some of the sediment debris got out into the road, into the storm drains. So they spent some time there and cleared quite a bit of debris out of the storm system there. Here's a overhead view of the damage path and then where the storm drains were in that area. So they kind of spent some time there and then got back to the Sinking Creek basin, and they finished last week. Here's an update since March 30th. 10,329 feet of line had been cleared, 27 cubic yards of sediment removed, and this is a rough estimate, but that's about 14 truckloads of sediment. Doesn't sound like a whole lot, but you put that in the stream and it disperses, and it can affect the stream a lot. So that was the Sinking Creek basin. We took the opportunity while we were in that basin to do some outreach projects. We did a tree day where we queried all landowners that lived along Sinking Creek and gave out some trees to get the riparian zone better. And so when we move on to Lytle Creek, we'll probably do the same thing. See here we have Lytle Creek and Town Creek. We have them split up. They're both in the same basin, but we kind of recognize them differently. A lot of people know Town Creek. It flows through Cannonsburg. What a lot of people don't realize is that there's a pipe connecting the stream that you see in Cannonsburg to the wetlands area on the other side, 231. In the meantime, there's a whole lot of storm drainage infrastructure flowing into this pipe. So you can see here that this basin is quite a bit larger than the Sinking Creek basin. So you can look for the crews to be here for, I would say, a lot longer time period. And then, as Robert mentioned, one of the other things we've been doing, one of the permit requirements is IDDE, which is illicit discharge detection elimination. And so Basically, what this requires us to do is screen stormwater infrastructure in dry weather, and that means after 72 hours of dry weather. Normally, in the past, we've walked down a stream and we've basically found the outfalls and seen if there's any flow that went into the streams from the outfalls, which is a good technique, but we decided to go a different route this way. We think that it covers a lot more ground. We basically took a grid that was existing, you can see in the top picture there. It was a 3,500-foot grid by 2,000-foot grid, and we queried out with our GIS the lowest invert elevation, and then we flagged that junction box. We went out and we, after 72 hours of dry weather, we went out and saw if there was any flow. If there was flow, we did research into it, then did sampling and so forth. But the good thing about this is while we're out there, we're able to see if some of these lines had sediment in them. It's covered the entire city. And then also took the opportunity to see marked damaged pipes. So just real quick before I finish, I have a table here of some of the results there. 275 junction boxes were observed. There was only 3 that have flow. 2 of those were groundwater. One of them we're still researching, but we don't think there's illicit discharge there. There's 14 junction boxes where pools were present, so that just means that there's a little bit of water in the drain. And then there's 2 junction boxes needing repair and 21 needing or had sediment present, so that kind of helps us with the vac truck too. If we can confirm, and one of the things we found is the Lytle Creek Basin, a lot of those drains that we're monitoring or screening did have sediment present, so it'll be good that the vac truck's working over there. But that's all I have.
You mentioned this sediment, how it clogs the streams and so on and so forth. One of these acronyms, of course, that we've all heard during this whole process is TMDLs, which is the total maximum daily load. And basically what that says is my own simplified version of it is that is the amount of things that go into the Stones River that the critters in there can digest in one day. And if that sediment gets in there, that covers up the habitat of the critters, and you have fewer critters, and that has a significant impact on what we're able to do. And that's why this is so important. One other thing I was thinking about as we were talking, I'm sure there is an agenda already written out for this wet project, what they're going to be doing, but knowing how little boys like big equipment, big toys, wonder if somewhere in that one of the field trips could be go out and see this vac truck.
That'd be a good idea.
Operate, and they might pay a little more attention and learn something unintentionally there.
Good idea.
All right, I believe Robert has and are we supposed to rate these presentations here about who did the best job, Robert, or is that on the...
It's worse than best, I think.
We talk about that in the office, actually. And
Mine was elementary level.
I'm keeping a scorecard.
All right, good. I'm not qualified to make an informed judgment.
you may remember working on and voting on a post-construction runoff quality requirement, which was effective in, I think, June as far as the ordinance, and then it basically went sort of fully into effect October 1st. And so really since then, we estimate about 35 development projects in the pipeline, so to speak, that are subject to the new Murfreesboro runoff quality regulation. And maybe about 16 of those, there's work going on in the field. probably not in all of them to the stormwater controls yet that I could show you any pictures, but I did want to show you some pictures of some of these stormwater controls going into the ground. And Josh is pointing out collecting sediment from the storm sewer system. These controls are going to be capturing sediment on site and potentially capturing a lot of sediment, keeping it out of the storm sewer system. So with that, I'll show some pictures, and I may run through them pretty quickly. If you have a question about something, just fire away, hopefully. This is a small site. Our regulation is triggered where we have development on 1 acre or more of land, putting down 10,000 square feet or more of impervious surface. So this is an office building and parking lot, and the storm flows generally that way and to the rear of the building. And so the engineer designing the stormwater controls for this site designed a bioretention, which I think we're now describing as an infiltration basin. And this was excavation in the back of the building, I want to say down 6 or 7 feet. And that's going to be filled with stone that will have open spaces in it. And the idea is to help the water, encourage the water to soak down into the ground. So that's what you see there, filled with stone. It was also, I think this happened afterward, then there's a soil medium put on top of that stone in which plants could grow. And in this case, I think what was put down, we're learning, and what was put down was a sandy, maybe clay soil, and they found when it rained that the water wasn't soaking down. And I think I'm correct on this. So some of that material, even though that soil was tested and apparently met the specifications, it wasn't, the water was holding up there, and we've kind of discussed why that might be. But anyway, that layer was removed, and in the end we have this, why I call it an infiltration trench. This is stone there, and it's performing well, best we know. The water that's going back there is soaking into the ground. And I show this, certainly in really large rains, there'll be an overflow, and that's designed according to our standards to control the rate of discharge. This was just on one of the sides, and that's what that looks like now, a grass swale draining the parking lot back to the stone-filled area in the back. Okay, any questions about that? I've kind of breezed through it, but that's an infiltration trench, or this right here is. And this is a swale that'll, of course, capture some sediment and other debris. These have to be maintained. So obviously, in this case, it's kind of a green control. Some controls there'll be underground boxes that the stormwater will run through and capture sediment. The EPA and the state are really emphasizing to us green controls and technology. So we've kind of built that into our post-construction ordinance so far.
One of the common terms you'll hear, LID, low impact development. And I think a lot that's what when we say a green BMP or green best management practice, just if you come across that LID.
Here's another site, and what I'm showing you, and I'll do the best I can to explain. Of course, you see an excavation, you see stone down there, and some piping, and that's the first site that I showed you, there's no under drain piping to that. The water just soaks down into that infiltration trench into the ground. Here, there is an under drain. And one of the ways to build a sort of green stormwater treatment system is something like a rain garden or a bioretention cell that water flows in and pools just a small amount of water that will soak down in the ground through soil where plants are growing, and then there'll be a stone layer beneath it. And if there's depending on the amount of water and all, some of that will go into an under drain. So that's what you see here. This will be covered with soil, making up the bottom of it's kind of a dual system, bioretention cells and a pond, which you'll see. Just showing one part of the excavation, the area for placement of one or two bioretention cells, one of two cells with under drains. Oh, this is on Highway 96, and it's a speed wash, super speed wash. Is that okay?
Well, one of the things we've been talking about is recognizing operations that are doing what should be done. So whenever we can,
Okay.
give these people a little positive recognition.
Yes,
that
sir.
would be good.
Water and Sewer Department inspects these installations or audits the installations, you might say. Okay. As I said, I'm trying to show the pond excavated there and shaped, and then there's a couple of bioretention cells that I'll focus in on here, but that's the kind of elevate. Here we go. So these are designed to capture small rain events. The runoff that leaves the pavement over there to the right will enter the bioretention cell, and that under drain's been covered up, but it starts. It begins underneath those bioretention cells and then drains out toward the street. So here's kind of an animated slide showing rainfall runoff exiting the curb cut and flowing into the cell, which is unfinished, and then some of that water will soak down into the ground and enter that outlet pipe. And the idea is that it will really be cleaner. And obviously we're going to be catching some debris and sediment in that bioretention area. Now that's not finished, so this will. I have some pictures later, and that's the stage of development of this one right now, so I don't have finished pictures of it. The green mat is a sort of overflow. This will only pond water to about maybe 6 inches, and in bigger rains that will overflow into the pond area. We actually have a point where we can monitor flow in the under drain. Just to another couple points about this pond. In larger rains, there's the outflow structure, the back right there, and then in huge rains, a pond would typically be designed with a spillway. That's, I don't know, once every 100 years or something. Okay. Statistically. I don't have any words on this. I hope I can describe it. This is a site out down in the Buchanan area, and what you see here, I'll just sort of move through. This is a sort of similar infiltration basin or bioretention cell there. Kind of in the main picture, you see the head wall, the white concrete there. Stormwater is coming from off-site, and will flow around this bioretention cell, which is designed to capture water from this property. or from this new development. You see the building back there. And as the area is being prepared, of course, we had some rains. We also had a little washout of the sides, and that's a problem that you'll see addressed later. What in the foreground there with the concrete blocks, they're preparing to build a filtration, not a swale, a filter strip. If stormwater can be spread out in a sheet flow pattern and then to flow over grass, that will capture sediment, and we have a design standard for that, and I'm kind of glad to see that going in. That I think that'll be effective, and we'll get to monitor and see how that does. So I'll just run by these. This will be an overflow, so some water can pond in the bottom and soak into the ground, but if bigger rains, it will overflow into that grate there. And the stone on the left is just to prevent that bank eroding. That's a pretty steep slope there, and so that's what that's for. And there's the filter strip sodded. This has just been done. So water will, in effect, kind of back up the small amounts behind the concrete berm there, and so sediment, trash, and debris can be collected there. I think that, okay, just a little more finished to it.
Robert, whose property is this? Who's doing this?
It's Superior Traffic Control, and I also know it is Capital Business Park, I think, lot. And Sam may come up here and talk about my next slides, and he could. So it's a Superior Traffic Control. Fred Fair, I think, did the construction and work here. Mr. Heyer, and so, but I think it belongs to Superior Traffic Control. Okay. Any questions about that? Good grief, I think I can already see some sediment coming from off-site
How large
there.
of an impervious surface is this functioning for? Is it several acres?
No, great question. I'm going to say a little over an acre, maybe an acre and 1.25. Of course, that's the roof and the pavement, and exterior storage area, okay. Maybe an acre and a half, okay. So right now I think that's mulched in the bottom, and this is something I'm learning what plants can grow and what sort of bioretention cells and so forth. I just think we have some learning to do, and we will. We see examples in other communities, and they are also learning, and so go ahead.
Well, just keep in mind, it's that the pond or the mulched area there that's surrounded with the small shrubs is the treatment device. There's a that concrete head wall and the channel that's kind of going around that is for conveyance for more of a regional area. That conveyance may be handling, 100-acre basin or something to that effect. So really, to handle the imperviousness for the site is just the smaller pond.
And this site really has these two controls. It has the pond draining sort of the front of the property, and then this is draining the back area of the property. So this is kind of a little, maybe not totally unusual, but there's a lot going on right there. You have two stormwater treatment devices and a bypass channel running through the middle. And the city has just installed a stormwater treatment system at the golf course. And I don't have before pictures, but if you've been out to Old Fort, there was a flume running from the paved areas down to the river. And so Sam Huddleston and others, he can describe what was installed. Got about 5 or 6 pictures there.
Thank you, Robert. Chairman Crabtree, members of the committee. We did work with the Old Fort Golf folks to do a retrofit. This site was in the stormwater utility. They were paying a monthly bill. Robert and the staff there at Water and Sewer had worked with the golf course manager to get credits where credits were due. They saw an opportunity to do a retrofit and take advantage of some existing space they have at the golf course, open space, and to use that for stormwater management. So we worked together to come up with this approach. This area drains probably about 3.5 or 4 acres of imperviousness. It's primarily the clubhouse, the parking for the clubhouse, and the maintenance shop area. So there's a lot of imperviousness concentrated there in one small area at the golf course. If you've played this course, I think this is 14.
Yeah, I think that's down 15 fairway, and 14 is down by the river.
Okay, 14. This would be the 15 fairway. There was a concrete swale that drained all that imperviousness and right into the river. And in this picture, left side of the picture would be the river. Now we're
The right, it's going down to the right. Yeah, sorry.
So we're looking at that. Yeah, there you go. And then, so we replaced that concrete swale with, and try to get something perhaps looking a little more natural with some native limestone. But we replaced that concrete swale with this channel. It has fabric in the bottom of it that allows the lower flows to infiltrate, and then the higher flows, of course, are passed through the rock and stone matrix there. We did a couple of improvements on the cart path itself because the carts were driving through this channel. It was causing some maintenance problems there as well, so we did do a couple of small structures there to allow the carts to pass over. And this is really the workhorse of the project. We did some excavation down next to the river. We connected the drainage system from the clubhouse and parking lot area to an existing pond along the fairway, expanded that quite a bit so that it would function to meet our credit policy, and we added a spillway and a outlet control structure. Just beyond that spillway would be the West Fork of the Stones River, and that spillway serves two purposes. It keeps our stormwater held back during events, during rain events that fill it up, but it also works to keep the river from invading the golf course during fairly high river elevations. Obviously, the river can and does overtake this area from time to time. Part of the hope was that we would improve the playability of this fairway by keeping the river at bay during some of those smaller events. And you can't see it here; it's a little bit obscured, but it's the outlet structure there has a smaller low flow pipe and then a larger high flow pipe. Those actually have valves on the downstream side that close when the river gets up, but open and allow the stormwater to pass into the river when the stormwater is higher than the river elevation. So that project was completed just in the last couple of weeks, and you can see something else we did here. We planted native grasses along that riverbank. Obviously, the fairway, the golf course, they have turf requirements and playing surface requirements, but they also have a lot of areas that they're trying to manage in natural vegetation. And so we gave that a little boost here by planting 4 native grass seeds. I'll embarrass myself if I try to name them. But suffice it to say that we did get some native grasses and plant on that riverbank, and the golf course in their turf management, vegetation management program intend to allow that to grow without trying to mow it or maintain it. I'd be glad answering questions on this.
Sam, was any attention given, or did this even come up in discussions of what can be done down there about the fact that, I don't know how long ago it was, maybe 4 years ago, there seemed to be, there was a big movement where somebody cleaned up the banks of the river, which a along the golf course there, which basically was removing a whole lot of vegetation. And and I'm talking about some pretty large trees, things that were hold that water back at high levels. I know since then there's been a little riprap, that sort of thing, stone put in there. But was that discussed? Is there any?
Not as far as the overall golf course. We certainly discussed vegetation management along the stormwater pond and along the bank of the river, and what the golf course maintenance staff would do and what they would not do as far as vegetation management.
Well, it would appear to be that one of the big concerns is when the Stones River gets high, that I just don't see how you can talk about controls out there without talking about the vegetation that's on the banks of the river there. But you guys are the experts. That's just a
and certainly
personal opinion.
The mindset of the engineering community in the past several decades on stormwater management has been designing projects to manage those large events. The extreme events, the flooding of the river, or those extreme events. Our stormwater quality program goes to the other end of the spectrum and looks at the small events. We look at the storm event that would happen perhaps on the average once every 3 months, 4 times a year, and that becomes our design standard. Or we look at the design standard for a once-a-year storm event. And so you have to marry up the small intensity but very frequent events, like perhaps what we had today, versus what we see once every 10 years or once every 50 years. And both of those, we try to consider the effects of both of those. Vegetation management is certainly very important to us along the Stones River for bank stability, stream bank protection, providing a good ecosystem for the river system. But as with any vegetation system in a developed area, you're going to have to manage it from time to time. What we would look to do with the golf course is work with them to make sure that management of the stream bank is consistent with those other goals. One of the things we will do in a follow-up on this is we'll be working with Robert and the Water and Sewer Department to analyze this for credits. The golf course they are paying into the stormwater utility fee, even though it is a city-owned facility. They get a stormwater bill, a water bill, and a sewer bill, just like the rest of the customers in Murfreesboro. But we'll be working with the Water and Sewer Department to evaluate this for credits, and then we'll credit their stormwater fee based on the performance of this system. Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions for Sam? Thank you, Sam.
Next on the agenda, discussion on possible revisions to the stormwater fee credit policy. And
Before we get on to
okay,
that,
sure.
this is something I was thinking of when Josh was up there, and this may already be in place on Channel 3. I have not been in Murfreesboro a lot the last few months, but I have noticed on some other city's TV station, and I'm sorry I can't remember exactly which one it was. It could have been Chattanooga, but I know it was on. It wasn't on the public TV stations. It was on some network stations. It looked like it may have been Charlotte, North Carolina, but it looked like they had purchased some ad time, which we wouldn't have to do. And this is relative to the, what did you say, Josh, IDDE, illicit discharge detection elimination, where they had, there was a little blurb on there explaining what illicit discharge was and asking people to call and report that. To me, that does a couple of things. It puts some education out there. It gives a more efficient way of of, and more cost-effective way of correcting those discharges, and it also gets a little buy-in from the folks out there that are paying the bill. I don't know, we may already have something like that on Channel 3, asking people to call in.
We could bring the catfish guy out of retirement and start running those again.
All
That's
right.
basically what he dealt, I mean, the car wash,
Right.
the different things that, getting in the storm sewer
And
system,
you're speaking of the MTSU
the waterworks.
Waterworks
Yes, sir.
program out there. I didn't, I remember that, but I didn't remember that there was specifically any number for them to call.
There
that
was,
time.
there could, I mean, we could look at possibly modifying that or doing some, I don't
Yeah,
know if
that's good for
IDDE
education, but now that I know this, what I do about it, and,
Right.
you know, having
Right.
that telephone number was,
Okay. We have run maybe a number for stormwater along with other call-in numbers for city services, and but we could sharpen that up. And
well, as I said, it may already be out there. I don't know. I just was impressed with this. These other
no,
cities,
thank you.
'cause they,
That's
unless they got the ad time as public service announcements, they were really.
Well, there may be some more sophisticated, I guess, TV advertisements or TV that's more honed in for the IDDE. Now that stormwater's kind of been on everybody's radar for the past few years, that we could, some not-for-profit type organization is put together that we may be able to modify. We can look into that.
That reminds me of something which I may mention again. We, the vacuum truck, sometimes we find grass clippings getting washed into the storm drains, and I think the city will pick those up. We ask for them to be in the yard, though, not out in the street, where it will go into it'll go into the storm sewer system sometime, stop it up. So that's my public service announcement right there, if I can scoot that in. Okay. Is that... I'll say a few things about the last item on the agenda. It's not for you to vote, just to think about these issues and just for your input.
A little more education on something we've learned in retrospect. Is that right?
Right. Okay. And so what we're going to bring up is the possibility of a credit or a discount to the stormwater fee. We have a credit policy that was developed before we implemented the stormwater fee, and so there's a 15% credit for solids reduction. There's a 25% credit for what we call stream bank protection. That's a kind of discharge volume and rate control credit. We can have larger credits if a property provides control for really large storm events. All of that reduces the impact on the city storm sewer system and the maintenance required for it and size of pipes, and then replacing and fixing those pipes has a cost to it. So we also give a credit to a school if it's doing a certain amount of teaching of, say, the Project WEP program, and then in PDS permitted facilities. So another possibility we've seen in other cities, a credit for commercial property and businesses that implement stormwater quality management. So this would be a credit on the order of, say, 5 to 15%, where those business operators are practicing stormwater pollution prevention. And you can look in the memo, we've listed some examples of that. For instance, if that business is doing employee training on stormwater controls, if you think about different properties, restaurants or some businesses that are actually maybe generating water, pressure washers. I don't know if they'd have a property, but other controls or practices they could do, labeling storm drains near the site. If there's potential for spill, if they can show they have a spill kit and procedures, sweeping and vacuuming parking lots. All of these are protecting water quality. So I'm thinking we'd like to be able to give a credit for that. And we would have to have some way to track that, but that's fairly straightforward, an application, and maybe we do periodic inspection or have them certify that annually, say. Some businesses might want to install something like a rain garden that will capture some of the runoff from the property and capture sediment. But maybe their control doesn't meet our doesn't meet sort of the standard of our regulation. But along with, say, rain barrels, rain garden, if we can give them a credit, then that's great. We want to see that. Right now, we don't have any incentive. If somebody would put in rain barrels, if they sweep their parking lots, that's helping stormwater quality, but we don't have any sort of positive reinforcement to give them. We can fine them if they're doing something wrong, but we'd like to give some credit. So that's the proposal. Details need to be worked out, but if you have any ideas or comments, that we'd like to hear them. Okay.
You will accept these later after we.
Oh, yes, thank you.
don't.
And
I didn't want this to be a pop quiz. 'Cause I'm
Okay,
afraid
it
I'd
sort of
forget.
is a pop quiz. I can move on to another one, and our credit policy actually reads something like this. The policy restricts the opportunity for credit to stormwater treatment that's located on site. Okay? No claims for a user-fee credit will be considered by individuals claiming treatment or runoff control measures located on a tract of record under different ownership. Okay, that's good, and we did that for a reason, but we're thinking now we might want to change that. Just for example, because we see this situation in some planned commercial developments, the more efficient, probably more effective design for stormwater treatment would place treatment in a regional spot. It would treat from what will ultimately be several lots of record. So if we can ensure that will be maintained, then, and if that's the way it was designed on the front end, then do we have to restrict that credit only to the lot where the treatment system is located? Or can we recognize a credit for other lots where the stormwater is being treated, at that one location? So there you go.
And we've talked quite a bit about this internally, but it would ultimately, I think, require that all of the affected properties enter into some type of agreement with each other that the city doesn't necessarily need to be a part of, but we would need to know. It never really, the first property owner or the first several property owners that agree to it, it may be very, well, obvious verbally or whatever, but it's really for that second or third property owner that comes in and buys the tract. There would need to be something that would notify that potential buyer of a tract that there's a regional, he's part of an agreement for regional water quality treatment. So there would need to be, and we've got the maintenance agreement that's being recorded right now. It's just, would we want to record an agreement amongst the properties that initially agreed to do it? So it would just be, there's some mechanics there that would need to be thought through. I'm sure the legal department would guide us appropriately in those.
Could this be set up similar to a step system where we have multiple users and they all pay equal amounts to maintain the, to pay that?
I think that's the type of agreement, if you've got a 10-acre, large grocery store, 5-acre, whatever, and then you've got a 1-acre, that would I don't know if we would necessarily, you would think that the prorated share of imperviousness, that's how the maintenance fees would be broken down based on the size of the imperviousness of each lot. But yes, I think there would need to be we would need to see some agreement amongst the group that if one guy wanted to pay for the maintenance of it all, that's fine by us. But if they wanted to prorate it somehow, then that would just be up to them. Because really, we're just going to be looking at giving them the credit if we see this agreement. How they maintain it and how they apportion the cost amongst each other, I don't think we would.
Well, when we have a developer that goes out and develops some residential lots and they install a step system, they set aside a certain amount of property for that. And I think, and I could be wrong, they actually deed that over to CUD, and then they're responsible for maintaining it on the front end, on the development end of a parcel of land. That might be something that we might be able to implement for this, that we're going to have 2 acres or we're going to have an acre used set aside for water retention, and your square footage is going to pay X and your square footage will pay X, and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. I definitely envision that amongst the group. How much involvement we as a city have on setting that up, I don't know. But we would obviously recognize it and say, okay, if there's an agreement for one or several of these properties to maintain that device according to our standards, then we'll give everybody the credit on their fee.
In that case, you described that system was turned over to the utility. I guess in most or all of these, where it wouldn't be, it would still be privately owned.
And I'm just saying that might be just a model to look at to see how that works, and it may be applicable to this situation.
I can see that fraught with challenges, no matter what you do. Let's say I've got, I think you guys, this is a complicated example here. I'm not sure I can understand the one you put in here, but let's say that there's a 10-acre piece of property, and it's the topography is such that it lends itself to one central stormwater pond, whatever. And let's say that I buy a piece of that 10 acres, and I negotiate that with the developer that I'll pay for X up front here if you will agree to maintain this stormwater, because I anticipate in the future I'm going to sell this piece of property. And I think what we're concerned with is whoever buys that from me knows what agreement I made with that developer.
Right.
So I can see all
That's the challenge.
And what we're saying is we need to be careful that whatever the agreement is spelled out somewhere.
Yeah, and I somewhat doubt that most developers that are selling something would want to have something that would exceed the life of, once they've sold it, they would be out of it rather than be married to it.
I would certainly expect successful developers would have that approach.
Okay.
We've been approached on a couple of instances where what you've described is that there's a common location, or there's the logical location for everything to drain towards, and it would be ideal for a regional stormwater quality device. And the policy, the credit policy reads right now, well, only the guy that has the pond on his property gets the credit. And the discussion was, well, what if we get an agreement in this commercial subdivision, We said, well, we would consider it, but there's nothing in the policy right now that allows it. So it does complicate
The
issue.
flexibility of having that, though, would greatly enhance it to where I think you'd have a much more efficient way. These are the things that we learn as you get started and go through something, and you can see how reviewing and revising has the potential actually to greatly help administration.
Right. Absolutely. Well, we want all of our documents, and we've said this to all the stakeholders and to design community, the environmental community, development community, that we really do view most of our documents as fluid and living. And we hope to keep them updated and keep them up to pace with current practices, current technology, and we also, with our credit policy, would want to do the same.
There was one other item, maybe a change and or just a new policy perhaps, and I'll give you the example. I've been on several properties that are along the river or creek, and the city has a water quality protection area policy, in fact ordinance, that we require in new development. If the development's happening along a creek, that developer and property owner have to leave a buffer zone there of undisturbed vegetation. And this is really something on existing properties that, just from my narrow perspective, protecting the creeks and stormwater quality, we'd like to see. So it seems that I have met commercial properties and even homeowners that they might be willing to improve their creek bank, and maybe they will, which is a real benefit to water quality. And so I guess we've talked about maybe having a kind of a reimbursement policy to if a property owner is willing to vegetate that bank with native plants, maybe even remove invasive non-native plants, then, which is a benefit to the stream and to stormwater control, then could the city say pay for that plant material up to the level of, say, their stormwater fee? So, because there's no credit for maintaining a buffer zone, I guess that's another way we could approach this. There's no current credit for a buffer zone, but as a way to encourage good streamside management or some of these green practices on commercial properties or others, might we want to have a reimbursement policy? And so that's what's described here. And there was I don't know if you looked at this closely, but an example was given in the case of property owners that improve streamside vegetation. So you see there invasive plant removal, and so if a property owner would submit a plan to us and just let us know they're going to remove invasive plants, then the cost they expended for that, perhaps we could reimburse that up to, say, a quarter of the annual stormwater fee. Then the other improvement, you see installation of native plants within 35 feet of top of bank. As long as they let us know what they're doing and it looks good to us, then perhaps the city, out of stormwater fund monies, could reimburse, say, some portion of that plant material, and up to, what their annual stormwater fee is. And, most probably they're going to have to spend a lot more, or considerably more than their annual stormwater fee to put those plants in. But that would vary. So,
And I realize that is just a draft or something to start discussions, but I see that qualification in there, expert contractor, and we don't need to get into that now, but what would constitute an expert contractor, and I would think there might be some of these situations where the property owner would be able to do that themselves if, I'm talking about put-in plants, or it wouldn't necessarily need to be a major earth-moving operation, but that
Okay.
little clause in there, expert contractor.
Is this geared primarily towards commercial operations?
I think in talking about it,
Let me rephrase that, non-residential
Non-residential.
operations?
I think yes, just the concept and the discussions and all. One reason, because in some ways, they'll, sometimes have more frontage or more area to work with, but that's
I would, and just throwing this out there, I would think that if we had a residence whose property backed up to Stones River or to Sinking Creek or somewhere along, that might be a benefit also to have
Okay.
some of those devices installed. And I don't know how we get into setting policy for residential, because, up to a quarter of their annual stormwater fee, their fee is $36 a
Right.
year.
Okay.
We're not talking about very much.
$8,
reimbursement.
that would hardly be worth coming up here to fill out a form for and parking in the parking lot.
The credit policy is applicable to just non-residential
Okay.
and multifamily
I
properties.
think at some point, I guess what I'm seeing is that we may want to consider something.
We've talked about, internally, if we wanted to do a stream restoration project that affected several residential tracts, and that could be a CIP, or capital improvement project that we funded from the stormwater funds, but we would have to, we haven't set up any policy or procedures as to how we would approach the public and, quote, get permission if we would need to get from them a preservation easement, and if we went in and did a public improvement through multiple residential properties, we would need some type of sign off that they're agreeable to it, and secondly, that after we did it, that they wouldn't go in there and take it out when they decided that they didn't like it, or the next property owner comes in and says, hey, I don't like all those trees in my back, next to my stream. So we haven't set up that procedural way of going about it, but at some point I think we would. I keep thinking of Spence Creek out on Highway 99. That was in a lot of that green pasture field that didn't have any really back in the day. I still think it's that way. It's pretty doesn't have much canopy or much cover for water quality purposes. And I know there's a lot of residential lots through there. I mean, I think that would be a great candidate to do this, but we would need to set up our policies and procedures on how we would go about getting permission and then protecting the land improvement that we invested in.
Well, as to this issue of, it's a good point. I mean, it's $8. It's not worth the trouble.
Right.
But if you remove that cap of up to the fee and just apply a cost-benefit measurement to it, if the benefit to our water quality is greater than that waiver of that fee, invest more money into it, because the cost-benefit test is what we need to be looking at anyway.
Right, and I guess really the way I'm looking at it is we would be kind of in control of the reins of those projects versus just reimbursing
Right. You obviously-
residential.
Yeah.
We would take the bull by the horn, so to speak.
And obviously, you need to protect your investment.
Right.
As the point you made about the next property owner ensuring that improvement stays there.
Right.
Thank you for discussing that with us and listening. And
Do we have anything else, Mr. Haley?
other than
We don't have any extra time. I'm not looking.
okay,
I
well, we'd
just wanna give you an opportunity.
we'd really like for residents to put those grass clippings in their yard, and instead of in the street. So,
Well,
thanks for,
I was interested in your comment on that. Do other departments agree with that? Because when they start trying to vacuum it up, it's out in, if that's,
I think so. I will, yes.
all right.
Yes.
Robert said it.
I'm hoping
That
I
was
don't
a
get in trouble
definite
for
maybe,
that.
wasn't it?
I see some of those guys having quite a challenge vacuuming them up now, and I can imagine them having to go up in the yard.
Okay.
Just a point. All right, is there anything else?
Mr. Chairman, if I may ask Robert just one question. As we were discussing the revising the credit policies and whatnot, just in discussion, I'm just going to go push rewind just for a little bit. Has anyone to date, as you know it, has anyone been cited for non-compliance, whether relative to residential, commercial, anybody so far with the stormwater, with the changes? Just curious.
Let me think. Of course, we've had violations on construction sites or illicit discharges. The new changes in October or last year, we're really, probably the short answer is no. We're hardly to that point, or we're not quite there. So as far as maintaining those systems, like what I was showing pictures of, we don't yet have enough in to be inspecting and noticing, but we have had violations, so to speak, on other aspects of the program. Is that answering your question?
Yeah, that's enough. I'm just kind of wondering kind of where we are as we move forward, as we are progressing, as we consider these changes. I just kind of curious as we progress forward, how are we doing thus far?
Right.
Okay.
To follow up on Corey's question there, I assume when these violations are pointed out, the people take corrective action. Nothing else necessary, is that right?
Yes. You ask a good question. I'd like to be able to give you, just through management of data and reporting and so forth, and your question makes me think, wouldn't it be great if I could give you a list? And I can to an extent, but that's a good question.
And keep in mind that once the October post-construction requirements went into effect, that qualifies everyone for a 40% credit on their stormwater fee. So as long as they're maintaining those ponds, and I think that's where Robert was heading, is that a lot of these things haven't been mature enough yet for there even to be a maintenance period. They're just going in the ground, but they are receiving the credit. And if they don't maintain it, the first level of enforcement is to take away that 40% credit that they receive on their fee without any other fines or so forth. But as far as people paying their stormwater fee, we've had very, very good compliance there. I need Tommy to be here to know exactly. I know we had a few issues to begin with, but nothing of real significance, and I believe right now everyone's pretty much complying with or paying their stormwater fee.
Thank you.
Move we adjourn.
There being no further business, we are adjourned. Thank you, Robert.